Hello, everybody, and welcome to the show today. So today we are going to take the guesswork out of growth. And to do so, we have a very special guest. So with us today is Bill Flynn. Now, Bill's actually a real expert in startups and in taking business to the whole next level, as you'll see. So it's very important for every startup to have a team that has a healthy alignment to the vision and mission of the actual company. And a good leadership mindset can make the company go the distance, but the team needs to be there as progress happens. So Bill Flynn, CEO of Catalyst Growth Advisors, has more than 30 years of experience working for advising hundreds of companies, including startups, where he has a long track record of helping them succeed. And he gives a simple 5-minute free choice test to describe and understand the behavioral tendencies of people in the work environment. He believes that businesses survive because of people, strategy, and execution, and of course, most importantly, cash. Learn how the predictive index can be a great tool for the hiring process as well as in company growth, and we'll talk about that more today. He had 5 successful outcomes, 2 IPOs, and 7 acquisitions, including a turnaround during the 2008 financial crisis. So a lot of people can relate to that with what's going on right now in the economy. He is sought-after speaker for Vistage, YPO, and well-known business conferences. Bill also is a multi-certified growth coach, certified and distinction in the foundations of neuro leadership, and certified predictive index partner. Now, Bill lives in Sunbury, Massachusetts with his wife, dog, cat, and he has 4 chickens. I'm going to talk about the chickens, see if he knows all the chickens' names, or if he even named them. I've got questions there. Away from work, he is an avid reader, athlete, and enjoys volunteering locally. He is not off cheering on his collegiate champion daughter when he's not doing that. He has an upcoming book, Further Faster, the vital few steps that take the guesswork out of growth, which we'll be diving into today, which is due out March 2020. So that is like this month. I think it just rolled out. So Bill, welcome to the show today.
Great. Thanks, Ty. Glad to be here.
Okay, so I have so many questions. First of all, what are the chickens' names?
You know what? My wife calls them like Gretel and Esther and whatever, but I don't think they really have names. They look like old ladies, so she gave them these sort of, Ingrid, I think is one of the names. But I'm not sure which one is which.
Well, that's what I wanted to know. Like, do you name chickens? Do you not? So I answered one very important question I wanted to know right away.
Yeah, well, so when my daughter was younger, we had about 9 chickens, and they were devastated. We live in the woods, so you never know. We have the Discovery Channel outside of our window every now and again. And my daughter actually named all 9 of them, and she knew them by name, etc. But my daughter's now in college, so these chickens were after her, so we haven't named them yet.
I get it. I like that. So I've known a lot of people that lived on farms growing up. Yeah, I'm from Indiana, so I'm from farm community. And the interesting thing is that they named the animals as kids, and then the animals wouldn't be there anymore. And so they quickly learned to not become attached too much to those animals.
Yeah, so these are egg-laying chickens. So we can name them, but once in a while, a fox or coyote, or every now and again we see a raptor above gets them. My daughter and I unfortunately saw something in action when she was about 14. It's like, oh, there goes another one.
Yeah, so that makes it harder to name them. So you've got a ton of experience. You've done a lot of cool things. But I wanted to ask, what made you, because you do a lot of coaching now as well as an author and do a million other really cool things. But what made you kind of go from being in the business of starting businesses, growing, taking my IPO, and then kind of getting into the coaching world to help entrepreneurs get their business off the ground and grow successfully? What kind of helped you make that leap?
Yeah. So, there's always a seed in a lot of these things, right? Something happens and it may not grow immediately, and mine certainly didn't. So I've done 10 startups since 1991, about 25 years. And as you said, I was 5 for 6. I was actually 5 for 10 eventually. The last 3 or 4 weren't that great. There's a theory out there, something called founderitis, which is, you get a founder who sort of falls in love with their idea and not the problem. And sometimes that's usually an issue, because I heard you earlier on another show talking to someone, it's about the audience, it's about the customer. You have to make it about them and try to solve their problem as opposed to trying to say how smart you are. So I tried to find a way to transition out of that after my 10th startup, because I was about 50 years old at the time. And I would love to do another startup. They're terrific. I love solving the puzzle. I love the clean sheet of paper and try to figure stuff out. That's just a blast. But I wasn't confident I could find a Goldilocks founder, as I like to call them. All founders are crazy. You have to be crazy because it's nearly impossible to do what you think you want to do. But you can't be too crazy. So I decided at that point to switch to coaching because I had an experience about 10 years ago between startup 5 and 6. And I'll do the short version of the story, but basically I was put in a situation. I took over a division of a company that I helped to sell. And the first 2.5 days of this email hosting company that I had taken over, this was before Gmail and Office 365 were a thing, we didn't deliver email to anyone because our entire technical infrastructure collapsed on itself. So there was no Amazon Web Services. This was, you had to rent space in a data center and man your own thing, and it was designed poorly and it just collapsed on itself. So we lost 1,000 customers in a week. I had to go around the country and try to save these big partners of mine, which, one was Ingram Micro, which you might know, Endurance, which bought Constant Contact recently. So these are some pretty big players. And we were a $9-10 million business. So I had 60 people working for me and I had to do something. So I had some really good CEOs that I worked with. I took some of their knowledge and experience. I'd read a lot of books and I just cobbled together this system. And I didn't know it at the time, but I turned out to be a coach because I didn't know how to run a technical infrastructure. I didn't know how to run customer support. So I couldn't have the answers. So I said, here's where I think is a good direction for us to go. I'd like each of you to draw your map from here to there to get us there. And that's what we did. And it worked great. But the best part was, and here's what I'm building up to, is that 2 of the guys that I worked with had never really been in this situation before and never really run an organization like they had. And the day I left, or around the time I left, they both said the same thing to me basically, which was, I just want you to know this, the thing that you made me do, I hated it. It was really hard, but I'm so glad you made me do it because now I know how to do it. And that was coaching. And I tucked that away. I did a few more starts, but I tucked that away. And that was the impetus for me being a coach. Because I said, I want more of that. I want to help more people to have that experience. So that's why I do what I do today.
That's interesting. And one of the things I've looked at with your training is you kind of have an interesting perspective. Like you almost treat a startup and a business as 2 separate things. Is that right?
Yeah. So I'm a Steve Blank fan. I don't know if you know who Steve Blank is, but his definition of a startup is a temporary organization in search of a business model. You are not a real business yet. You are trying to figure out how to be a real business. And once you get some repeatability, then you're a business. Then actually what you have to do, you have to revisit all your key critical decisions and relationships and partnerships and make sure that they're the ones that will get you to be much larger. Because you work with a lot of startups, I know. The first few customers that you have are not necessarily the same customers that you'll have. This is the whole crossing the chasm thing, right? They're just as crazy as you are. And most people aren't that crazy, right? So you have to figure out how to make something a little bit different. So you have to treat your business differently. A lot of what I do as a coach can translate to both, but there are certain things. So for instance, you can't really have a strategy as a startup because you haven't figured out how to solve the problem in a way that enough people will pay you for it. Once you do that, now you start working on your strategy.
That's really interesting because a lot of people never get to that point, and is that related to that? I mean, we all see the statistics that, a lot of startups fail, the majority do. So it seems like you're treating the 2 the same, and the ones that fail never make it to that other level of being a real business. So what keeps them there? Like what keeps them to that point where they never make it to the level of being a real business?
So what a lot of startup founders miss is usually a startup is started because either they or someone that's close to them had some sort of struggle, right? Or they saw something that wasn't right. This could be better. And, and they're creative people and they're wonderful people. I'm not one of them. I'm not a visionary. I'm the scaling guy. So I have great admiration and respect for these people who just have all these ideas and things, but it's not about the idea. That's the spark. But I've done 10 startups and I've worked with hundreds of others through, I'm here near Babson College. So there's a lot of entrepreneurial spirit here, and obviously MIT and Harvard, and there's a lot of that here. And I found that I and they, the original idea you had, if you made it through the knothole, is not the same thing when you made it through the knothole. It changed, because if you were smart and you were without ego, you do, I think what you do, they're good at what you do. You're a discovery interviewer, right? Is you sort of take something and then you go with it from there, as opposed to having a set idea and then trying to fit everything into it, right? This is something called confirmation bias, right? I love Simon and Garfunkel have a great line in one of their songs about it, which is, you hear what you want to hear and you disregard the rest. And if you do that as a startup founder, you're in trouble, because you might make it, but the likelihood of you making it is probably less than 1%. The ones that make it are the ones who don't fall in love with their idea. They fall in love with the problem and the customer. And it doesn't always work. Sometimes you find out that the world isn't big enough. There are not enough people who are going to buy your product. And if you want to stay a lifestyle business, that's fine. You can be small. But if you want to really grow, you have to pick a market as well that's big enough. But you got to start with that sort of journalistic approach to the problem, and not try to find people who believe what you believe, but try to find a problem worth solving, and then figure out how to solve it the best way you can.
Yeah, and there's a lot of interesting things you said there, and you talked about the target market, and you've also talked about that before, that a lot of the people that start up, the audience that they end up serving isn't the same. And I see that too. I mean, it took us years in our business to really develop a customer avatar, to really know who you were speaking to. That's really problematic. I mean, you're either writing to somebody that's a startup, or you're writing information and content to somebody that's a $10 million company. Those are two completely different conversations. So how does that work? Because most people as starting up will sell to anybody that will buy.
Yeah.
But then eventually the most successful ones develop a niche and then learn to say no to everybody else that really drags them down. So how do you see that go from somebody that will just accept any customer to then making that transition of learning to say no to certain people and developing kind of the niche that they can hone in on?
Yeah. So that's a problem. And as you said, depending on the stats that you read, somewhere between 75 and 96% of all businesses that start die within 10 years. That's pretty staggering. That's why I say you have to be a little crazy, right? Because the odds are just against you of being successful. And I think the ones that are successful are the ones that are really curious, and they're really trying to help someone or some constituency to do something, as opposed to try to make sure that their idea is put out in the world. And that's a rare skill, especially, we as human beings. There's a great saying about ideas. Ideas are like children. None are so wonderful as our own. And just because you love our idea doesn't mean enough people are going to love your idea. When I talk to a lot of startup founders and business owners, we talk about, I ask them one of the questions when I do Vistage. So I speak to maybe 100 to 200 CEOs a year through Vistage. And I always ask the same question, which is, tell me your customer value proposition. And most of them tell me about themselves. They say, oh, our customers love us because we're awesome. We have this product and that product, and they love us because we deliver this thing. And what I've found is customers don't care what you do. They only care what you do does for them. If you can figure that out, then you'll design something that works. And a great example is Waze versus Google Maps, which, we probably all know. Google thought they were in the maps business, and they made a really good map. It was much better than MapQuest. You and I probably know what that is. Maybe some listeners don't. But MapQuest is no longer here, and Google definitely made a better map. But Waze said, why do people use maps? What is one of the struggles that they're having that they use a map to help them solve? And they found out that it's not a map they want. They want to know how to get from point A to point B on time. And they said, okay, with that as the idea, how would I solve that problem? And that's when they came up with Waze, and there was technology and other things that did that. And then Google bought them for $1.3 billion, like a few years in. I think they only had a few $1 million in revenue. If you can do that as an entrepreneur and really get to understand the essence, I'm a big fan of jobs to be done. I don't know if you're familiar with that theory. That, you have to really understand the job that people are hiring products to do for them. And if you can figure that out, then you'll come at it a wholly different way. And that will get you from startup to scale.
I can tell you that I still struggle with that today, with an 8-figure company. It's one of those things where to me, it kind of breaks down to, you've got to go with the goal you have to have that in mind. Like if you know the goal you're working towards, then it's easier to kind of create the best path to that goal. It sounds like that's kind of what you're touching on, is that you really have to know like the problem and understand the problem you're trying to solve, understand what the end solution really is, and then work backwards to create the best path to get there.
Yeah, and I'm a little hesitant to say goal, Ty, because goal, you kind of get emotionally attached to your goal. I like to say direction, because it's, as you probably know, you've built a tremendous business. It was not a straight line, and you had to, it's a curved, it's a weird road that you go on. But if, as long as you're heading in that direction that you believe, because you've done the research and you've been empathetic and compassionate and you understand what your customers' needs are, you'll eventually get there. I don't know how many people will be there when you show up, but that's, you're doing your own market research, etc. But if you can do that and think about direction, I think you're in a better stage. Then the goals will just fall out of that.
Sure.
In order for us to get there, of course, we need to do this, this, and this. And it is much easier to work backwards. Once you figure out your direction, it's so much easier to work backwards than it is to try to figure out and go forwards. You can do it. It's more difficult, and it takes a lot longer. And that's why I think the reason I wrote the book is that so many businesses struggle unnecessarily, and their lives are wasted, and their relationships are affected, and their health is affected, because as they try to scale, they spend more time in the business just trying to keep it going. And the bigger it gets, the harder that is. And usually only relying on a few people as opposed to a lot of people. And that burns them out, burns you out. And these vicious things I go to, they do a great thing at the beginning. They do a check-in, and then family and friends is a check-in. It's almost always the lowest number. It's like 4 on average out of 10. And they don't want that. They want to see their kids. They want to spend time with their partner and see their friends. They just can't. They don't have time.
Well, it really all kind of starts, like you said at the beginning, of knowing who your core customer is. A lot of people don't know that, Bill. I mean, a lot of people just do not even know who their core customer is. So how do you figure that out? How do you start to develop an avatar and really get a grasp on who your core customer really is?
Yeah, so there are 3 steps in core customer, and the persona is one of them. But I'll tell you, Ty, my experience is that's the most dangerous thing, because we think because we can describe who they are, how old they are, what their income is, etc., that we've got it solved. But that's not really what drives them. There is something underneath that the struggle they're trying to solve, the progress they're trying to make, is the reason that you're your customer. Now, a lot of them might fit into a bucket, and that's certainly good. But the story I tell all the time is my dad, who's no longer with us, but he was definitely a curious guy and loved technology. And he and I were both avid and rabid iPhone users. Now, he's a completely different generation. He's blue collar. I'm white collar. At one point I made a lot more money than he did. But we like the phone for the exact same reasons, so what's the persona there? Is it, a middle-aged to older man who's gone through this life experience and has this much income, or is it someone else who's a completely different generation? So what I've found is there are 3 things that you want. You want to understand demographics, that type of thing. But you also want to understand the need that you're solving for them, which is this problem. And then obviously the benefits, what are they getting from what you do? So back to the ways explanation, my consumer is probably obviously someone who commutes a lot or travels a lot. They're probably a certain age, because at a certain time, most people, older people aren't going to do it. There's going to be some 20 something to 40 something where the bulk of the people are, but they're struggling with getting somewhere on time and knowing that it's a risk. Boston is one of the worst commutes in the country. And I drive into Boston or Cambridge every year for 20 years. And it was an unknown for many. You listen to the radio and try to get the traffic, but that's always 20 minutes behind at least. And, you get stuck. So that was a struggle that many of us had, and Waze solved it. But we all are different. Some are blue collar, some are white collar. That persona wasn't necessarily the whole answer. So I think if you get that, if you get the who is my customer, sort of what do they look like? I sort of say, could you recognize them at an industry event? What would they look like? Would they be a male or female, et cetera? That's great. And in a quick conversation, you can get their title and that kind of stuff. That's all wonderful stuff. But then you got to get in their head. Tell me about your problem. What do you struggle with? You had a guest on earlier, and they said you have to sort of understand their needs, and you have to ask them what they want. I found out that that's actually pretty dangerous because people don't know what they want, and it's not their job to tell you what to build for them. But what we love to do as human beings is we love to complain, and we love to tell you our problems. And that, if you can get them to do that, that's where the magic is. And it's usually in the emotional words. We found that when people make decisions, mostly the blood goes to in and around the limbic system, which is the emotional sort of center of our brain, or so we think, which has no language. So we make decisions before we actually are consciously aware of making the decision. And we need to get, as good entrepreneurs, if you can get in there and understand that, then you will build something that they had no idea what they wanted. I've got my iPhone here, right? In 2007, I had no idea this is what I wanted. I could not have told Steve Jobs to build this. I would have had a better Walkman or a slightly better phone, but he was really good at being curious and understanding, what do you use the phone for, and why is music important to you? And then he combined all those things into one thing, which we can't live without, which is insane. But he didn't ask us, how can I make a better Walkman for you? He said, why do you use that? What does it do for you? How does it make your life better? And then he said, great, Andy or Johnny or whatever his guy's name was, he said, I want 1,000 songs in their pocket. That's what I want. That's the direction we need to head in. And that's what they built. I think if you can do that as an entrepreneur, you are far away better than anyone else, because very few people do that.
Yeah, and Steve Jobs is really big on that concept as well, that people don't know what they want. And if you look, like you said, at the iPhone or the iPod or the iPad, none of those things even existed. We didn't know we wanted them because they didn't even exist until they were actually just created. So it really comes down to understanding who your core customer is, then understanding their need. And that gives you kind of a direction. And you've kind of touched upon this, but you think that understanding their need really comes down to just asking them. And because you mentioned that might not be the best way because they don't know what they really need. So then what is the best way to figure out, really understand the problem at a deep level and understand their needs at a deep level? If you can get some feedback from them, but you can't let that directly be what guides you because they don't even know what they necessarily want.
Yeah. So there's this theory called the 4 forces of progress. Are you familiar with that?
I am vaguely familiar. Yes.
Yeah. So it's all around the jobs to be done. It's sort of started in the 80s and 90s. But there's this theory that says that there are 4 things that drive progress. One is the push and the pull. And you've talked a lot about this on your show, right? This is advertising and getting people, it's not necessarily leading the horse to water. It's letting them know that they're actually thirsty, right? That's the push and the pull. And we're good at that, really good at that as marketers. What we're not as good at is there are 2 forces that are working against us, which are habit and anxiety. And that's what you have to work with in order to get people to move past. Because we as human beings with this brain we have, our brain is generally extremely efficient, which means it's lazy. It doesn't want to do new things. And so we fall into habit and anxiety all the time. It's like, well, this new thing, but what happens if it's wrong or it doesn't work or I might have wasted my money? It slows us from buying it. So if you could take that anxiety away, then I think you're in a much better position. There's a story I love to tell, which is by this guy, Bob Mesta, who is one of the progenitors of the job to be done theory, which I think Clayton Christensen, the late Clayton Christensen was most people knew of it, but it wasn't really his. It came from before that. He just thought it was great and he wanted to make it into a real theory. He talks about selling condos, and he had 3 constituencies, but one were people who were empty nesters, and they wanted to move out of their big house, and he had condos, and they wanted 1 floor living, and they wanted 2 bedrooms. And he said, what do you want? And they said, we want 2 bedrooms, what about 1,800 square feet, because we don't want to be too big, we don't want stairs, all that kind of stuff. So he did that. He did pretty well, but then sales just flattened out, and he couldn't understand why. And then he did, as I said, what you do really well. He went in and did some discovery, and he said, what stopped you from purchasing? You were on your way, and what stopped you? And he said, we talked to people, and we kept hearing the same words, which was something about the dining room table. He said, that was weird. So we dug into what was about the dining room table. And what happened was, I don't know if you have kids, but the dining room table in your house growing up was where everything happened. There's an emotional gravity to that thing. And they couldn't just throw out their dining room table. So they just didn't move. So he said, great. So he shrunk the second bedroom, made the dining room bigger, and guess what happened? Sales went up like 20% and stayed there because he solved that problem. That was the anxiety and possibly the habit. That's what you have to do. You have to understand all the reasons why people make decisions and try to solve for all of them. And when you do that really well, they'll buy stuff and they won't even know why they're buying it because they didn't even know they had that anxiety. That they didn't really know that that was what was holding them back.
Do you think some of those anxiety really come out in the form of objections?
Yeah, and usually false objections. Price is the most prevalent. It just costs too much. It's because they don't really see the value of it, or either you don't provide the value, or you haven't demonstrated it in such a way that it means something to them. There's something in neuroscience called generation, and it's really important for people to learn. And when people are buying something, it's really a learning process, right? They're learning something new and that might be helpful to them. And generation is what you do when you have them associate it to them personally. So when I do my Vistage talks, I always ask at the beginning, I say, here's what I'm going to do. And I tell them where we're headed. And I say, at the end of this, you're going to be able to have a 36-month forecast that is pretty accurate 3 years out on day one. It's going to be about revenue, profit, cash, widgets, and people. I said, if you could do that and know with a really high level of confidence that you could predict the next 36 months with a high level of accuracy, what would that mean to you? And I have them write it down. And then they share it with each other. And then I do my talk, because now I know I have a little trick in neuroscience. I know that they don't care what I have to say. They care what I have to say does for them. And they've created their own reason to listen to me. It's a cool little trick. And it works. I don't get them all, but they're more engaged. And that's what you need with someone who's going to buy, right? You need to get them engaged. You need to have them tie it to something that's meaningful to them, not to what you think is really cool. It's not about features and benefits. It's what those things do for them. If they can say, yeah, if I could do that, that would be great. I better listen to this guy.
So we've talked a lot about core customer, and you've talked about understanding really their need. And now you're kind of this other area of benefits. And I think it's interesting because like every product we create, we have a guide that has our features, our benefits, and the benefit of the benefit of what it really means to the customer, Yep. But I don't think a lot of people understand that. I don't think a lot of people even understand the difference between a feature and a benefit, let alone this idea that people really only care what's in it for them. They just care about the real benefit, what it really means to them. So give an idea here. What's the difference between features and benefits, and how important is it for somebody to really talk to them in a language of what's really in it for them?
Yeah, so I'm going to answer your question in a greater way than you asked. So features are definitely the things that you do. What's the stuff that you do and you believe are important to them? The benefit is what they believe they get from doing that. But there's the thing in the middle, which is why. Why is that a benefit to them? And so I'll give an example. I have a client who does lead generation as their business. And they're a small business. They're a few $1 million. They've been around for 20 years and they've done a great job. And I asked them that question. We went through this sort of, who's your customer? What are the needs and what are the benefits? And they were really good at who the customer was. They absolutely knew who they were. They knew the title. They knew all this kind of stuff. They knew the benefits they got, which was, I asked them, they said, so, but what is the real thing? Why do they buy from you? And the head of sales who's been there for 6 or 7 years, and the founder who started 20 years ago would say, well, it's about filling the pipeline. It's about getting them meetings. That's why they do it. And I said, maybe. And I asked them this one question. I said, so when you talk to these people that you know are your customers, there's this persona, this avatar, as you say, and they really let their hair down and they let their guard down. They tell you what it is that their problems are. What do they say to you? And he said, you know what I hear a lot? I hear that they just want me to get sales off their back. So that's not a feature or a benefit. At least not something that they said out loud, right? But you had to get underneath. Now, so if you go, so I don't know what you do. If you say, hey, if you want to get sales off your back, or you can put it in a positive way, if you want to have a much better relationship with sales and really work together as a team and hum and that kind of stuff, we can help you do it. By the way, here's how we do that, right? We do these features and we give you these benefits. But it's when you let them know that you truly understand them, then you've got them, right? This is about creating friends. You probably have a best friend, right? Your best friend gets you and you get them. there's usually little or no judgment. There's unspoken stuff. That's what your customers want from you. They want you to get them. And if you can do that, then you'll build this moat around your business, because I would guarantee most of your competitors have no idea what that means.
How important is the people aspect of this? So a lot of great strategy, and you have this belief of people, strategy, execution, and cash. And I think we've talked a lot about the strategy behind that. Maybe I left some points out we could revisit. But what about the people aspect? How important is it to get the right people on the bus? How do you know who the right people are? And then how do you get them kind of all in line with your vision of doing things this way, where you're focusing on the core customer, you're focusing on the understanding the need, and focusing on the real benefits or the why behind what they really want?
Yeah, so that's a big part of my book. And people say, people strategy, execution, cash. What should I start first? And my answer is always people. People do everything. They buy the stuff, they sell the stuff, they make the money, they spend the money, they make the decisions, they screw up. I mean, it's all about people do everything, right? In most businesses, it's not true for everything, but so there's three aspects to people. There is the individual. And we're really good at focusing on the individuals, right? Oh, I have to hire the person with these skills and et cetera. And we're good at interviewing for those people, or generally good at that kind of stuff. But then we find out 6 months later that nobody likes them and they don't fit, because we didn't interview them for, do they believe what we believe? Do they have the same general values that we have? They're really good at what they do, but everybody hates them. So people avoid them. They don't want to have meetings. They don't send them stuff, all these things, right? And that just slows your business down, because you do that enough times, enough people, in key positions, that's a problem. So people are important, and culture is important as well, because culture attracts the right kind of people to your business. So you at least have a good enough chance of them fitting in. But I'll tell you what the secret is that I've found is it's the team. People join a company, but they stay because they're on a really good team. There are people who will stay at a crappy company, but if they're on a really good team, they'll stay. And by the way, if they're on a really crappy team in a really good company, they will leave, because that's really important. 83%, according to ADP research in the last couple of years, 83% of people are on at least one team. Teams do almost everything in business. So from a people perspective, really important. Totally agree with the right people, right bus, right things, all that stuff. Jim Collins, great stuff. And that's what I say, performance is a team sport. And you have to think about that. So what I teach my clients is you need to know how to create great team leaders, not leaders, team leaders, people who know how to run a team, who know how to craft a team, right? Because a team has some sort of function that they do that has a key output. And you have to understand what the components are of that output. And you want to make the team fit that. People are spiky. People are not well-rounded. We are not well-rounded. We are spiky, but if a really good team leader will take the spiky people and make them into a really well-rounded team, that's what you want. You want a well-rounded team that believes what you believe, who are great teammates, meaning they have each other's back. They're all sharing roles, responsibilities, rewards, etc. All that great Pat Lencioni stuff. But to me, that's the most important thing.
It's so essential. And you hit on some things that really make me think back. One of the things that I'm proud of in our company is we've hired over 110 people. We've had one person quit, one ever, right?
Yeah.
But it's because we do exactly what you're describing. We don't even hire based on experience. We strictly hire based on core value and cultural fit completely. Yeah. But in order to do that, as you said, you got to figure out what your culture is. You got to figure out what your core values are. And then we literally hire and let people go based strictly on that. If we're going to let somebody go, did they violate our core values? And how many did they violate? That tells us the yes or no there. And we do the same thing with hiring. It's so brilliant what you just described. And I've seen it work very well in real time. What about cash? How does cash is obviously important, but I think a lot of business owners are obsessed with growth. And I think they lose focus in cash. And I think it's why a lot of them fail. But what's your feedback? What's your thoughts on how people mismanage, or what should they have in perception of cash?
Yeah, so I'm going to say this. Remember, I'm a growth coach, and I'm a 30-year sales and marketing guy. Growth for growth's sake is the ideology of a cancer cell. And if you do it only for that, a cancer cell kills its host. And that's usually what happens. It may not die, but you'll certainly struggle. That's the third part of my book is cash. Cash should be your primary financial growth metric, because growth sucks cash. And if you want to grow, you need to invest. And unfortunately, you need to invest in front of the actual growth. You have to hire good people. You have to maybe buy systems or processes or equipment ahead of it, because you need to be able to do that. So I tell folks, okay, let's figure out how we want to grow and what we need to do. And then how much money do we need to do that? Okay, now let's figure out, based upon our profit and our gross margin, how much revenue do we need to generate, assuming profit margins will be at a certain point, and then we'll have cash out the other end. So cash is your primary growth metric. And I have people look at me like I'm crazy. Well, no, it's revenue. I said, revenue is vanity, profit is sanity, cash is king. Revenue is great when you're talking to your brother-in-law and you want to brag, when a reporter calls you and you want to say, oh, we went from 50 million to 100 million. That's awesome. But it doesn't mean that you're a healthy company. It just means that you grew. The only way to grow, and you're in the cash business, right? You can certainly get cash from third parties, and I don't have any problem with that. But if you don't want to lose control or potentially make decisions that are based upon satisfying a third party, which is not your customer nor your team, you'll probably make different decisions than you would have otherwise. And you probably won't like this. I'm a fan of try to be a customer-funded business first. And if you want to go to a cash source that isn't going to get in your shorts or force you to make decisions that aren't best for the longer term, because you will make different decisions. And the more, 10 startups. So this is, VCs are a problem, in my opinion, because they want you to sell your business in 6 to 8 years. Because how do they make any money back? That's how they do it. And so they ask all of their companies to grow in an outsized way, because they know many of them are going to die, but some of them will pay back the fund so they can get another fund. That's not how you grow a long-term business. It's a great way to flip a company. I have no problem with that. That's a perfectly valid way to do things. But if you really want to grow your own business and you want it to last 10, 20, 30, multiple generations, you have to think longer term. So cash is the key metric to do that. And, I think there's a path. Have customers do it, then go to banks or something, which is just going to give you loans. And then investors should be further out, and only necessary maybe for really super turbo growth, because there's no other way you can get a ton of money that fast. That's up to you. That's your decision. But as soon as you get an investor to invest in your business, you have decided to sell your company.
Great talk today, Bill. I mean, we've touched on a lot of great stuff, and we could sit here and go on for hours. But how do people get in touch with you? How do people learn more? How do people get access to further faster? How do they learn more about your coaching services? Kind of give me some feedback of where they can go to take a next action step.
Yeah, sure. So I have a website. It's called catalystgrowthadvisors.com. It is, it's obviously a marketing site for people to get to know me, but I also have a lot of resources on there. As we talked, I read a lot of books. I have a book list on there. I have podcast things on there and other places to go that I think will help leaders. All my contact information is on there. My phone number, my email address, which is bill@catalystgrowthadvisors.com. And you can get access to my book. My book is on Amazon. It's all the places you think. There's not an Audible version yet, but that'll be out in April. So that's where you can get me, my book, whatever, anything I can do to help folks. As I said earlier, this is a calling for me. So I'm happy to help anyone in any way I can.
Bill, thanks for coming on today. It's been a real pleasure.
Cool. Thanks.
So everybody, make sure that you visit catalystgrowthadvisors.com. That's catalystgrowthadvisors.com. So I've worked with tens of thousands of business owners, and I've seen many succeed and I've seen many fail. And I got to tell you, from what I can think of on the top of my head, almost all failures, we just discussed what made them fail. And in almost every one of the cases, Bill sat here and touched upon a very important point that led to one of their demise. So just scratching the surface of his knowledge here, we got a real basic blueprint of exactly the things you need to be focusing on to succeed in your business, to be able to take the startup and actually make it a real business that can grow and scale, but not just to grow for growth's sake, to actually do it in a responsible way where you're focusing on cash and the cash that you're making, that you can do it profitable. So you don't need all this outside money. You don't need venture capital. You don't need all this money to people to pour money in when you can make the profits to be able to even grow the business itself. So again, we just scratched the surface of the blueprint here. If you want to learn more, there's a tremendous amount of resources that you can access directly from Bill at catalystgrowthadvisors.com. So make sure you visit that. And on the show resources, resources page for Bill, we'll also put his social links where they have even more information available on his social channels as well. So the best action step to take is to go right now to catalystgrowthadvisors.com to dig in deeper to this blueprint that we discussed, and also look and grab Bill's book on Further Faster. This really outlines what you need to do to grow a business from startup to business and do it successfully. So make sure you visit catalystgrowthadvisors.com. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.